All right, everyone, thank you for coming. This is Dr. Kelly Straka. I will be talking to you today a little bit about chronic wasting disease. I am the state wildlife veterinarian for the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. We're going to start with a little overview of the basics of chronic wasting disease. I'm not going to go into too many details about the veterinary aspects of this disease because I think for our purposes today, I just want to highlight some key points that I'd like you to know about the basics of the disease. For starters, we know that this is a disease of cervids, and by cervids I mean members of the deer family, so deer and deer-like species such as white-tailed deer, mule deer, elk, moose, and caribou. We know that CWD is caused by a misfolded protein called a prion, and I realize that can be kind of a confusing thing to think about, but these are normal proteins that are in our body, and they don't cause any problems. In fact, they're really important to have. One of the problems comes about when they're misfolded, when they're folded improperly, for one reason, the trigger of which we have not found. But once they're misfolded, they do not behave like a normal protein, and they can lead to a host of problems in the individual animal. We know with chronic wasting disease that there is no valid live animal test, which means there's no way to detect this disease reliably in a living animal. There's also no vaccine, no treatment, and no cure. And I put in parentheses on the slide here yet, because there are a lot of people that are actively working to find these things, but as of right now, we don't have those kind of tools that we really wish we did to help combat this important disease. So let's talk a little bit about the clinical signs of chronic wasting disease. We know that you can see emaciation, which is extreme weight loss, lack of coordination, drooping head and ears, excessive drooling, excessive drinking, and excessive urination. But one of the things I really want to highlight and get across in this presentation is that we know this disease has what we call a prolonged incubation period, on average about 18 months. Now the question is, what does this mean? What does it mean when I say that there's a prolonged incubation period? What I mean by that is that all these clinical signs that I've got listed here, we might not see, and more than likely we won't see. These are the clinical signs that typically start to appear on average a year and a half after the animal's been infected. So that means while this animal's infected, we won't know. You can't tell by looking at an animal that they're sick. That's really important because a vast majority of our hunter-harvested cervids in the state of Michigan have not been clinical, no clinical signs at all. So more than likely, these animals are going to look perfectly healthy. Another really important point with this is that the prolonged incubation period is not the same as the span of time in which we can find the disease. So we can detect CWD in an animal that does not appear sick. That's really important because I hear people talking about not being able to detect the disease if they're newly infected, and that's not true. We certainly can find it, even though they're not showing these clinical signs. You will see in this picture on the slide that this infected animal, this was a CWD positive animal out of Arkansas, and you can see what I mean when I talk about that excessive drooling, excessive salivation, and that's going to be really important in a slide or two. So I want to talk now about how does CWD spread? What are the ways that we know this disease can spread? First of all, I like to look at it in two different groups. So we know that we can have transmission either directly or indirectly, and I'll explain a little bit of those. So with direct transmission, you can think of the picture on the left side of the screen. We know that animal-to-animal contact can lead to spread of the disease. These animals are infectious. They are contagious. So we know that an animal can be infected through direct contact with another individual. But also, just as importantly, is indirect contact. So indirectly, the animals can get this from the environment. And one of the ways that happens is through the shedding of urine, feces, saliva, and blood. All four of those excretions have been shown to be positive with CWD prions. So we know that an animal, if it's urinating in the environment or defecating in the environment, can be depositing these infectious agents on the environment for other animals. If they come along in contact, they can pick up those agents. Now keep in mind that when I talk about that, we know that an individual deer pellet, say, could contain CWD prions. However, those prions are not going to be replicating in the environment. They're not going to be growing on their own. So when you deal with environmental contamination, it's at a very low local level. Obviously, as time goes on and we know more of this disease is in the environment, that's where that becomes more of a concern. I'd like to talk a little bit about the history of chronic wasting disease. So this disease was first detected in 1967 in captive mule deer in a research facility in northeastern Colorado. So as of the mid-90s, You can see on the map here, this was our known geographic extent of the disease. Now, I cannot say for certain that it was not present in other places, but certainly this is where we know the endemic or the origin, the main source of this infection was in the 1990s. Let's fast forward a little bit to today. You can see that this disease has obviously expanded out of that original darker gray shaded area in southeastern Wyoming and northeastern Colorado, and now it's detected pretty much across North America, including 3 provinces up in Canada. So one of the things that we talk a lot about is what hunters can do to help. And I think it's really important for hunters to realize a couple of the main concerns that we have with spreading of this disease. And Chad will talk a little bit about this shortly. But we know that carcasses can be infectious. So movement and poor carcass disposal practices can spread the disease to new locations. Whether or not you're hunting in an area with CWD, please be mindful of your carcass movement and disposal efforts. Also, feeding a mineral sites concentrate deer. One of the misconceptions out there is that with chronic wasting disease, these animals lose weight. So they're not eating, they're not drinking. That's not true. We actually know these animals will continue to eat and drink really late into the course of the disease. So obviously, anything that congregates animals in an area can facilitate transmission of the disease. This photo is the photo of the original CWD infected deer down in Missouri, and you can see that she was found at a natural mineral lick site. And one of the things you also notice is in the background a number of eyes. So she was a CWD positive doe, and all those eyes in the background were also other deer in the area that were looking to come in and use that same mineral lick. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Chad, and he can start talking a little bit about CWD trends in other states.
All right, again, I wanted to thank everyone for coming. My name is Chad Stewart. I'm the Deer Management Specialist for the Michigan DNR. Certainly, if you're here listening to this presentation, you have a tremendous passion for deer, and that's why we're putting on this program, is because we're passionate about deer as well. You may be asking, why is this disease important for deer? And we think that it's fairly important because of some of the data that's coming out of other states that have been dealing with it for a lot longer than what we have been. And I'm a data person, so I want to share some of that data with you today. So I first want to start talking about what's occurring in Wyoming, specifically in their white-tailed deer. And I want to take you to what's called the South Converse Unit, which is a little over 1,200 square miles. Now, a research study just recently concluded that found the prevalence of CWD in females was about 42%, and for males it was about 29%. Now, they don't have population data available for white-tailed deer in this unit, but this research found that CWD positive animals were 4.5 times more likely to die than CWD negative animals. At the end of the research, they found that both hunting and high level of CWD is unsustainable for deer populations in the future. If anybody wants to look that article up, this is the title of it, and those are some of the authors. It's Chronic Wasting Disease Drives Population Decline of White-tailed Deer, and they found that CWD is contributing to a 10.4% annual decline in white-tailed deer in this unit. Going over to mule deer, so they do have both species of deer in that unit. Again, another research project looked at CWD and found that prevalence has gone from about 15% to over 50% in the past decade. It's the highest rate of CWD identified anywhere in the world. The population has declined from about 14,000 mule deer to about 7,000 deer in this same unit. And has it affected hunting? You bet it has. They've scaled back hunting seasons, they've gone to buck-only harvest, and they're seeing fewer trophy animals. So these animals are getting infected at such a young age that they're not living to that 3.5, 4.5, 5.5-year-old age class that many hunters want to see, especially their bucks. Again, this research has gone through the peer-reviewed process, and there's the title and the author. And what this group of authors found was that CWD is contributing to a 21% annual decline in mule deer in this unit. Switching over to Wisconsin, which had the unfortunate designation of being the first state in the Midwest to identify chronic wasting disease. Late in 2001, confirmed in 2002, it was found in 3 animals. And once they started looking at the following hunting season in 2002, what they found was a lot more animals that tested positive for CWD, well over 200. And as they continued looking over time, they found more. And to date, This is a little old, so 2015, but they've found a lot more CWD across a much broader area, and you can see it's actually starting to work its way north. And they actually have found a few positive animals, not shown on this map, just south of the Wisconsin-Michigan UP line. So again, there are some additional positive animals that have been found throughout much of the state. And I will point out that Wisconsin has not done a whole lot of surveillance in recent years. So what they found in some of these units where they have identified CWD and have been monitoring it is that the prevalence rate that Kelly mentioned previously is increasing over time. So with this graph, you'll see that the blue lines are for male deer, the yellow lines are for female deer, the solid lines are for adult deer, and the dashed lines are for yearling deer. You can see that in Wisconsin, specifically the southwest core area, adult males are more likely to have the disease than yearling males or female deer. And you can see how the prevalence rate has increased in this unit over time. So with adult males, it started off at about 7 or 8% of all males, and you can see in 2016 it's now over 30%. So really 1 out of every 3 deer now is adult male deer are infected with CWD in this unit. Just west of there to north central Iowa County, you see the same general trends emerge. You see this exponential growth in the prevalence rate, and that's the concern. It's not where you start. It's if you could keep it at that 1 or 2% level, it probably wouldn't have much of an impact on your deer herd, but it's very hard to keep it there. And what we're seeing in Wisconsin is that it does continue to increase in the deer population. And you can see here with adult male deer, 50% are infected in north central Iowa County in this unit. Just north of there in southwestern Sauk County, you see the same exponential growth that you're seeing elsewhere. We are not cherry picking any data here. You can see this pattern emerge throughout all of Wisconsin where they're doing this intensive monitoring. You're seeing exponential growth throughout the deer herd. It may be varying in terms of scale of what we're seeing, but it's still accumulating and it's still growing in the deer herd. So obviously Illinois is just south of Wisconsin, and they found it also in 2002. So I wanted to present some results from a study that was published, I believe, back in 2014 that showed the prevalence rates in the southern part of Wisconsin where you see shaded in red, and the northern parts in Illinois where you see shaded in orange. And I want to take you over to this prevalence graph right next to there. And Illinois and Wisconsin were both very aggressive in terms of their treatment of CWD once they first found it. And you can see that the prevalence rate in both Illinois and Wisconsin from 2003 to about 2007 remained the same. So they both treated this very aggressively, and they both tried to manage for the disease. That dashed vertical line you see in 2007 indicates sort of a shift in how Wisconsin approached CWD, and they were much more hands-off. And you can see in the following years what happened to prevalence rate over that time. It certainly has started to creep up in that shaded area. Now, Illinois maintained a fairly flat prevalence rate in that time, which seems like a success, but keep in mind they've devoted a lot of resources, a lot of time, and a lot of money to keeping it at that, and they're certainly not getting rid of it. So these are some of the challenges and questions that we face as managers when this disease arrives. So getting into Michigan, we first found chronic wasting disease in April of 2015, and it was confirmed in May, on May 20th, from an independent lab out in Iowa. And that was the first case of chronic wasting disease identified in a free-ranging deer in Michigan. It was a symptomatic 6-year-old female deer. So those pictures that you saw previously of the deer that looked like they were suffering from CWD, that were emaciated, not really aware of their surroundings, this animal looked like that. We found 8 additional cases in the Lansing area since that initial case. 3 of them have come from hunter-harvested deer, while 5 have come from USDA Wildlife Services sharpshooters, who we've generally employed in areas where are not able to be hunted. Many of these deer have been found in a suburban locale, and hunting is not really available or extremely limited, so we've incorporated that technique to get samples over the past couple years as well. Now, unfortunately, we found new detections in 2017 and 2018 in Montcalm, Kent, and Ionia counties. And as of this presentation date, we have 48 cases of CWD confirmed or suspected in hunter-harvested deer. And we do have some ongoing sampling that is occurring. So it's very possible by the time you're hearing this presentation, additional positive discoveries could have been identified. Prior to 2015, we had been looking for CWD. We just simply haven't found it. Our CWD surveillance really started in 2002, and we sampled quite a few deer in that time. Now in 2011, we shifted focus to our targeted animals, so animals that were displaying symptoms consistent with chronic wasting disease. And as of course we found it in 2015, but prior to 2015, we had tested 34,000 deer, about 1,600 elk, and 70 moose from the UP. Never found chronic wasting disease in any of those deer. As of February 21st, 2018, since 2015, we had collected over 30,000 samples, and you can see we have 57 total CWD positive animals over that time. Now keep in mind, CWD is not distributed evenly across the landscape. There are places that have it, places that don't have it, and certainly places that have more of it than others. So what we're seeing in places like Montcalm County, where we have 36 confirmed cases of CWD out of about 4,000 deer, is much higher than what we're seeing in what we call DMU 333, which makes up much of the northern part of Ingham, southern part of Clinton, and parts of Eaton and Shiawassee counties, where we only have 9 CWD positive animals, and we've tested nearly 13,000 deer at this point. Of concern, you see someplace like Kent County, where we really only have samples coming in from one township. We have 11 confirmed cases of CWD, and we only have 580 samples. So again, there is potentially the potential for a higher prevalence in some of these areas compared to where we first started finding it in Ingham and Clinton counties. Looking at the sample distribution by township and where we're finding chronic wasting disease in some of these areas, again, you can see that the townships that we're finding it in the northern part of Ingham and the southern part of Clinton, where we've been for 3 years, we have a lot of samples from a lot of these townships and not many yellow dots. So we're not finding a lot of CWD in that area. Go just north of there into Montcalm, Kent, southern Ionia. We don't have nearly as many samples because we haven't been testing there as long, and we're finding a lot more CWD. I'll also point out that areas outside of where these yellow dots are occurring, our sampling is not very high. So we don't have many samples, so we do not have a lot of confidence that the disease does exist or does not exist outside this area. And I believe that'll be certainly a priority moving forward. All right, so one of the things that we hear from hunters is how they can help with CWD surveillance or even management. And there are a few things that can be done. One, if you're hunting in an area that's known to have CWD or near an area that's known to have CWD, understand that there may be some regulation changes that have occurred to help manage for the disease. So certainly paying attention to our hunting and trapping digest and specifically the areas highlighted within our CWD section in that area is important to know if there's any regulation changes that have occurred since the previous year or previous couple years since CWD has been found. So 2, we certainly recommend getting your deer tested for CWD, especially if you're in a CWD affected area. Now the World Health Organization and the Center for Disease Controls recommends if you have a CWD positive animal, you do not consume that animal. There's no definitive proof that CWD can be transmitted to humans, but there is some very preliminary and emerging research coming out of Canada that certainly supports that notion using a very similar lab model, which is a primate, that's a macaque specifically, that has contracted a CWD variant-specific disease after consuming CWD-tainted venison. Number 3, disposing of your carcass in a responsible manner. If you're hunting in a CWD-affected area, we have been providing dumpsters to dispose of your carcass and carcass materials. If you're hunting outside of these areas, certainly landfilling these carcasses is a responsible form of CWD risk mitigation. in terms of making sure that those prions that are available in that carcass are not available on the landscape and easily taken up by plants or other animals. We also encourage you to avoid long distance movements with your carcass. So if you shoot a deer, do not have it tested and travel across the state or far away and then dispose of it in an improper manner. If that animal does have CWD, you're presenting a risk to your local deer herd, certainly by having those prions available on the landscape and available on top of the soil where it can be readily picked up by plants, as was previously mentioned. And certainly if you hunt out of state for deer, elk, or moose, know that there are only certain acceptable parts of your carcass that can be brought back into the state, and that's regardless of which state or province you're hunting in. So you can really only bring back deboned meat or the bone-in quarters of the animal, finished taxidermy mounts, a clean antlers or antlers attached to a clean skull cap, and a finished hide. So certainly, if anybody has any questions, certainly feel free to follow up with us at either that number or email if you have any questions that we can help answer. Thank you again.